Today I'm going to be looking at a game from Strategy and Tactics magazine. This is issue 274 and it's titled The Sun Never Sets 2. There was an earlier boxed game and there have been other games in this series like French Foreign Legion from Asante 200 and then First Afghan War in Asante 179, which I think I have some coverage of that on the channel here. So I'm going to go through this game. I want to talk a little bit about what this one does. It highlights these colonial battles in fairly operational level. We're looking at 1 or 2 week turns and monthly turns depending on the actual campaign that's being fought. And you have it's an I go you go, so you have events for both players, which are a variety of different things that can happen, sometimes no event. Then you get reinforcements and replacements, movement, which is handled by a march table, so movement's not automatic. So if you have a good leader, you'll do better with movement. Then you have battle segments, which are in adjacent hexes, but it's not automatic. You don't have to fight. And then you can, you do the battle using a battle board type arrangement. And you have 3 fire phases, I guess you could call them. So whoever wins tactical superiority gets to fire first in each phase. So it starts with the artillery fire. If you have any, fire that first. Then you go into the rifles and the muzzle loaders and the muskets and things like that. And then finally you go into melee, which allows the rifle and musket units to do hand-to-hand combat along with, spear or cavalry armed units. So that's kind of how it works out, and it's rolling dice and getting hits and taking losses. Then after that you have logistics, which is a big thing in this system. You're fighting in the colonial areas without much infrastructure, so logistics is a thing. And then the game does play off from morale, so units can be regulars, they can be veteran, they can be fanatics, rabble, all different types of units. So once you go through all of that, then the second player plays, then you move on to the next turn. Usually victory is determined by victory points for capturing locations, as well as leader losses and unit losses. So that's pretty much what you're going to have here. I'm going to be covering the game. I think there are 4 scenarios in here, but I'm covering one called Asante, which is a campaign against the Asante in 1873 and 1874. So the British are going to be going in against the African natives in this game, and we'll see how it goes along. We'll start by going down to the map, and there'll probably be several videos in this playthrough. So what's being depicted on this map, it's a fairly small map, is the Gulf of Ghana. And the British colonial forces have positions all along the coast, the coastal cities and fortresses, a fortress particularly at Cape Coast. And at Cape Coast we find General Wolseley and General Buller, along with most of the British forces. Nearby, there is another coastal town, Winneba, and the British player does have a garrison there under General Glover, and he has basically a native force that are friendly, and they are mostly armed with spears. And then the General Butler is in the position at Ada, with another native force. The Asante, on the other hand, have large forces that are deployed throughout the interior. Abu Bofo has a strong column, which he's beginning within a village called Prasu. And his force is pretty much all fanatics. Half of them are spear armed. The others are armed with smoothbore muskets. And then a bit farther inland at Kamasi, the leaders Kofi and Dwayben have assembled several spear-armed rabble-level units. And then in Mampong, Naquanta is deployed with a force consisting, again, of both spear-armed and musket forces. So in this game, the prize is going to be the conquest of Kamasi. This village is going to yield 25 victory points to the British the first time they capture it. And then additionally, Kofi is worth another 15 victory points. This is one of the leaders. And then the other leaders are worth 5 victory points. The Asante will receive victory points if they can hold coastal towns that the British had occupied prior, as well as if they can eliminate British headquarters. So both sides are going to get victory points additionally for eliminating enemy units, but in this game, the British are going to be worth more victory points. It's more politically damaging if they lose forces. So this game plays out again in 2 weeks per turn. So we're going to start off at December 15th in the year 1873. So I'm opening up here with the British, and they are deciding to send column 3 out. This is General Wolseley, and he has a major contingent of the British Army here with him. And Wolseley has a strategic rating of 2, and that's useful when marching because you have to roll on the march table. So with a 2 added onto the die roll as a modifier, it means that the march is most likely to be successful. And that is what happens. The march table yields a successful result, and the British march along this interior road from Cape Coast right to the outskirts of the village Prasu, which has the native contingents in it that are deployed there. I decided as General Wolseley to send out a reconnaissance to determine the size of enemy forces. Again, technically, even though I'm playing solitaire, everything's hidden. So you have these column markers and you don't really know what's in the force. So you can try to do recon. And again, for this, if you have a commander, his strategic rating is what's useful here. And he will be able to add this to the die roll modifier for the recon table. And he's successful. And he learns that the Asante force in Prasu is led by Abu Bofo. And it consists of a mixed army of fanatics. So these are some of the better forces we're going to face here. The Asante do not have any cavalry, so they can't really screen here. So they just got to grin and bear whatever happens. So General Wolseley knows he vastly outnumbers the Asante natives in this situation, so he is going to attack. And we have to roll for superiority. So the battle will be fought out on a battle board, and first fire goes to the one who wins superiority. And the leaders can use their tactical rating to modify their die roll for tactical superiority. And the British happen to win this time. So in this system, you have 3 different rounds of combat: artillery fire, then rifle fire, and then melee. So the British have 2 artillery units. So in the first round of fire, they will fire. They're farthest away and can have the biggest impact. So I have the naval battery, which has rockets, and these are fired, and they eliminate 2 of the native units. And then the Hausa battery, which was manned by natives, also fires at the Asante, but this has no effect. Bofo's army would get to fire next, but they have no artillery, so they don't get to fire during the artillery round. So we now move into the rifle round. The British are going to fire first here because they have tactical superiority, and the first volley is performed by the Black Watch, the Rifle, and West Indian Brigades. Now, in this system, like units can combine together to fire, so they have to have the same weapons type and the same discipline rating. So veterans can fight with veterans, rifles fight with rifles, or smoothbore muskets fight with smoothbore muskets. So We do get the first fire, and the British have 14 strength points of veterans firing these early breech loaders, and it's going to be a deadly volley for the Asante. And 3 more enemy units are eliminated, and then the last of Bofo's forces eliminated by another section firing in the rifle phase, the West Indian Brigade. So Abu Bofo is captured, and the British now hold this village of Prasu. You can see how I have the units spread out in a battle board. They're not deployed on the map there. They're set up into the which rows that they can fire in. So I got to tally up kind of the results of this first battle, and the British player comes away with 12 victory points. That's very good. And now I'm still on the British turn, so I'm looking at the rest of the British units. So I had General Glover, who also has a very high strategic rating. So he can march very easily, and he moves out along the road from Winneba, and he's got a small force with him. They're simply natives armed with spears, but they do have a good British commander. So you see them in the picture here going out into the jungle, but they are along a road that goes to the interior. They're traversing here along the banks of the Biram River. Also, General Butler is up in column 1 up in Ada, and he decides to march out also along the road along the Volta River. Butler has a strategic rating of 1, which is a good modifier, but it's not as good as the other leaders. And it makes him less effective in these strategic areas. So I rolled on the march table and I got a hold result. So I don't know, he ain't moving. He's stuck there for this turn, so that's 2 weeks of time. You know, maybe he got some negative intelligence that's not accurate or whatever, but his forces remain at their base in Ada. Then I have to look at supply. The British player has to expend supply units in Prasu to supply the large army there. That's Wolseley's army. It's very big, and that's the problem in this game. It costs a lot of money to move large armies and keep them fed and supplied. So, but Wolseley has brought on, sufficient supply wagons. I think in the last picture showing the battle board, he had 4 wagons with him, so worth of units. Then Glover is along the Biram River, which that actually aids foraging, being in that type of terrain, and he's got a very small force of natives, so they're able to forage with no losses. So now we go to the Asante player turn, and basically I decided as the Asante to apply a special rule and which allows a fortification to be constructed once per game, and I decided to entrench the fortification at Kumasi, which this is the valuable real estate that needs to be held, for victory points against the British. Then I had the Asante leader Dwayben advance with some natives out of Mampong. They head to the village of Dwayben and then continue to move toward the river Orda, which you can see that they're at the very end of it in this picture. And all of the Asante forces that are not in towns are able to forage successfully. And that brings an end to turn 1. So stay tuned if you'd like to see more of this game played out beginning in January of 1874 in turn 2. Until then, have a great day.